It was a cold Friday evening in December when the black Mercedes pulled up to the entrance of the Grand Bellevue Hotel. The driver stepped out first, rushing to open the back door for his passenger. A tall man in his mid-30s emerged from the car. His name was Raymond Carter, and he was the kind of person who believed the world owed him something just because he existed. Raymond owned a tech company that had made him wealthy beyond what most people could imagine. He had money, power, and connections. But somewhere along the way, he had lost something important. He had lost the ability to see other people as human beings. To him, everyone was either useful or useless. There was no in-between. He stood outside the hotel for a moment, adjusting his expensive watch and checking his reflection in the glass door. His suit was custom-made. His shoes cost more than what some people earned in a month. Everything about him screamed success. But if you looked closely at his eyes, you would see something else. You would see emptiness. Tonight was a big night. His company was hosting its annual investor gala at this very hotel. Wealthy businessmen, influential executives, and important clients would all be there. Raymond had spent weeks preparing for this event. It was his chance to show off, to prove to everyone that he was on top of the world. He walked through the revolving doors and entered the lobby. The Grand Bellevue was one of the finest hotels in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden light over everything. The marble floors were so polished, you could see your reflection in them. Soft classical music played in the background, and the air smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Raymond barely noticed any of it. He had stayed in so many luxury hotels that they all looked the same to him now. Nothing impressed him anymore. He walked straight to the front desk, where a young woman stood waiting with a warm smile on her face. Her name tag read, Mira Vasquez, Concierge. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back neatly, and kind brown eyes that seemed to welcome everyone who approached her. "Good evening, sir," Mira said politely. "Welcome to the Grand Bellevue. How may I assist you today?" Raymond didn't even look at her. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, checking emails and messages. He placed his ID and credit card on the counter without a word. "I have a reservation," he said flatly. "The penthouse suite. Make sure everything is ready. I don't have time for mistakes." Mira kept her smile, even though his tone was cold. She had dealt with guests like him before. Working at a luxury hotel, she had seen all kinds of people. Some were kind and grateful. Others acted like the staff were invisible. Raymond was clearly the second type. "Of course, sir," she said, typing quickly on her computer. "Your suite is ready. I see you're here for the investor gala tonight. If you need anything at all during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask." Raymond finally looked up from his phone. He glanced at her briefly, the way someone might glance at a piece of furniture. His eyes moved from her face to her uniform, and something like amusement flickered across his expression. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, taking his keycard from the counter. "Just make sure nobody bothers me before the event." He turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Mira watched him go, her smile fading just a little. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was just part of the job. Not everyone would treat her with respect. That was okay. She knew who she was, and that was enough. But what Raymond didn't know, what nobody at this hotel knew, was that Mira Vasquez was not just a concierge. She had a story that would have surprised everyone in that lobby. 10 years ago, Mira had been one of the most promising young pianists in the country. She had started playing when she was just 5 years old, and by the time she was 15, she was winning national competitions. Teachers called her a prodigy. Critics said she had the kind of talent that only comes along once in a generation. She had earned a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the world. Her future was bright. Everyone said she was destined for greatness. Concert halls, world tours, standing ovations. It was all supposed to happen. But life doesn't always follow the plan we make for it. When Mira was 21, her mother got sick. Really sick. The doctors said it was serious, and the treatment would be expensive. Mira's father had passed away years ago, and she had no siblings. It was just her and her mother, so Mira made a choice. She left the conservatory. She gave up her scholarship, her dreams, everything she had worked for. She came home to take care of her mother and to work whatever jobs she could find to pay the medical bills. For 3 years, she worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time. She was a waitress, a cashier, a cleaner. She did whatever it took. And through it all, she never complained. Not once. Her mother eventually recovered, thank God. But by then, Mira's life had taken a completely different path. She was 24, with no degree, no career, and a mountain of debt. The music world had moved on without her. The competitions she used to win were now being won by younger, fresher talents. Her moment had passed, or so she thought. Mira got a job at the Grand Bellevue 3 years ago. She started as a receptionist and worked her way up to concierge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. It paid the bills, and honestly, she had made peace with her new life. Some dreams just weren't meant to come true. That's what she told herself. But late at night, when the hotel was quiet and most of the guests were asleep, Mira would sometimes sneak into the ballroom where the grand piano sat. She would sit down on the bench, close her eyes, and play. In those moments, everything else disappeared. The years of struggle, the sacrifices, the what-ifs, and the could-have-beens. When her fingers touched the keys, she was that young girl again, the one who believed anything was possible. Nobody ever heard her play. She made sure of that. It was her private secret, her one connection to the person she used to be. Tonight, as she watched Raymond Carter disappear into the elevator, she had no idea that everything was about to change. She didn't know that in just a few hours, her secret would be revealed to an entire room full of strangers. She didn't know that the arrogant man who had just ignored her would soon be forced to see her in a completely different light. All she knew was that she had a job to do. The gala was starting in a few hours, and there was still so much to prepare. Mira straightened her uniform, put her professional smile back on, and turned to greet the next guest walking through the door. She had no idea that this night would change her life forever. The grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel had been transformed into something out of a dream. Hundreds of candles flickered on every table, their soft light reflecting off the crystal glasses and polished silverware. Giant flower arrangements filled the room with the sweet scent of roses and lilies. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently between guests, carrying trays of champagne and fancy appetizers. This was the kind of event where fortunes were made and deals were sealed with a handshake. Everyone who mattered in the business world was here tonight. Men in expensive suits stood in small groups, talking about stocks and investments. Women in designer gowns laughed politely at jokes that weren't really funny. It was all a performance, a game of appearances where everyone pretended to be richer, happier, and more important than they actually were. In the corner of the ballroom sat a beautiful grand piano. It was a Steinway, one of the finest instruments money could buy. The hotel had hired a professional pianist for the evening, someone who was supposed to provide elegant background music throughout the gala. But 20 minutes before the event started, the hotel manager received a phone call. The pianist was sick. Food poisoning. He wasn't coming. For now, the piano sat empty, waiting. Raymond Carter stood near the bar with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was surrounded by 3 other men, all of them investors in his company. They laughed loudly at everything he said, even when it wasn't funny. That's what money does. It makes people laugh at your jokes, whether they want to or not. Raymond was in his element. He loved being the center of attention. He loved the way people looked at him with respect, and maybe a little bit of fear. He had worked hard to build his empire, and he wanted everyone to know it. So there I was, Raymond said, gesturing dramatically with his glass, sitting across from this guy who thought he could lowball me on the deal. Can you believe it? He actually thought I would accept his offer. The men around him shook their heads, playing along. What did you do? One of them asked. Raymond smirked. I stood up, looked him straight in the eye, and told him that my time was worth more than his entire company. Then I walked out. 2 days later, he came crawling back with double the offer. The men laughed and raised their glasses. "That's why you're the best," one of them said. Raymond soaked it all in. This was what life was supposed to be. Power, respect, control. Across the room, Mira Vasquez was doing her job. She had changed into a slightly nicer uniform for the evening, but she was still clearly staff. Her role tonight was to make sure everything ran smoothly. If a guest needed something, she was there. If there was a problem, she fixed it. She was invisible in the way that good service is supposed to be invisible. She moved through the ballroom quietly, checking on the flower arrangements, making sure the waiters had everything they needed, and keeping an eye on the empty piano with a worried expression. She knew the pianist hadn't shown up. She had overheard the manager panicking about it earlier. But that wasn't her problem to solve. She was just the concierge. As she walked past the bar, she caught Raymond's eye. He was still standing with his group of investors, still holding court like he was the king of the world. One of the men nudged Raymond and nodded in Mira's direction. "Hey, who's that? She's pretty." Raymond turned to look. When he saw Mira, a slow smile spread across his face. Not a kind smile. The kind of smile that made her stomach tighten with unease. "Her?" Raymond said loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "That's the concierge, the one who checked me in earlier." The men looked at Mira with mild curiosity. She pretended not to notice and kept walking, hoping to slip away before anything happened. But Raymond wasn't done. "You know what's funny about women like her?" he said, his voice carrying across the space. Several nearby guests turned to listen. "They take these jobs at fancy hotels, smiling at rich men all day, and you know what they're really thinking?" His friends leaned in, amused. "They're thinking, maybe one of these guys will marry me." That's their retirement plan. Forget working hard or building something. Just find some successful man to take pity on you and you're set for life. The men laughed. A few people nearby chuckled uncomfortably. Others looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to say anything. Raymond raised his glass in Mira's direction. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out. "Keep smiling. Maybe tonight's your lucky night. One of us might just feel generous enough to save you from that uniform." More laughter, louder this time. Mira stopped walking. For a moment, she stood completely still, her back to the bar. Her hands clenched at her sides. Her face burned with humiliation. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, watching to see how she would react. 100 responses flashed through her mind. She wanted to turn around and tell him exactly what she thought of him. She wanted to explain that she had sacrificed more than he could ever understand. She wanted to tell him about the conservatory, about her mother, about the years of struggle and the dreams she had buried so deep that some days she almost forgot they existed. But she didn't, because she needed this job, because causing a scene would only make things worse, because men like Raymond Carter never learned anything from being confronted. They just got angry and made your life even harder. So Mira did what she had learned to do over the years. She swallowed her pride, lifted her chin, and kept walking. She didn't look back. She didn't respond. She just disappeared into the crowd like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had cracked inside her. In a quiet hallway behind the ballroom, away from the guests and the laughter, Mira leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She thought about her mother, who was healthy now and living in a small apartment across town. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, the late nights, the exhaustion, the way she had put her own dreams on hold so that someone she loved could survive. And for what? To be mocked by some arrogant man who had probably never sacrificed anything in his life? Mira closed her eyes and pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She had learned a long time ago that the world wasn't fair. Some people were born lucky. Others had to fight for everything. That was just how it was. Getting angry about it wouldn't change anything. But tonight, standing in that empty hallway, Mira felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just hurt or embarrassment. It was something deeper, something that had been sleeping inside her for a very long time. It was the memory of who she used to be. The girl who could make a piano sing. The girl who had stood on stages and made audiences weep with the beauty of her music. The girl who had been told she was destined for greatness. That girl was still in there somewhere. Buried. But not dead. Mira wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform. She had a job to do. The night wasn't over yet, but as she walked back toward the ballroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The air felt different somehow. Electric. Like the moment before a storm. She didn't know it yet. But in less than an hour, everything would change, and Raymond Carter would learn a lesson he would never forget. The gala was in full swing, but behind the scenes, chaos was unfolding. Mr. Whitfield, the hotel manager, was pacing back and forth in the service hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. His face was red and sweaty, and his voice was getting louder with every passing second. "What do you mean you can't find anyone?" he hissed into the phone. "I have 200 of the most important people in this city sitting in that ballroom right now. They paid a fortune to be here. And you're telling me we have no music?" The person on the other end said something that made Mr. Whitfield close his eyes in frustration. "I don't care about the short notice. Find someone. Anyone. A pianist? A violinist? I don't care if it's someone playing the harmonica. Just get me a musician." He hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, rubbing his temples. This was a disaster. The Investor Gala was the biggest event of the year for the hotel. Raymond Carter's company had paid a premium for everything to be perfect. If the evening fell apart, if the guests started complaining, it wouldn't just be embarrassing. It could cost the hotel its reputation. Mr. Whitfield had been in the hospitality business for over 20 years. He had handled difficult guests, kitchen fires, and even a power outage during a wedding reception. But tonight, he felt helpless. How do you fix a problem when the solution simply doesn't exist? He walked back toward the ballroom, trying to think of options. Maybe they could play recorded music through the speakers. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than silence. Or maybe he could make an announcement, apologize to the guests, and hope they were too drunk on champagne to care. Neither option felt right. As he passed through the service corridor, he saw Mira Vasquez standing near the staff entrance. She was adjusting her uniform, her face calm but her eyes distant. She looked like someone who had just been through something difficult but was trying to hold herself together. Mr. Whitfield almost walked past her. He had bigger problems to deal with right now. But then, something stopped him. A memory. It was late one night, maybe 6 months ago. Mr. Whitfield had stayed at the hotel past midnight to deal with some paperwork. On his way out, he had walked past the empty ballroom and heard something that made him freeze. Piano music. Not recorded music, live music. Someone was playing the grand piano, and they were playing it beautifully. The melody was so haunting, so full of emotion, that Mr. Whitfield had stood outside the door for 10 minutes, just listening. When he finally peeked inside, he saw Mira sitting at the piano. Her eyes were closed, her fingers moving across the keys like they had a life of their own. She was completely lost in the music, unaware that anyone was watching. Mr. Whitfield had quietly walked away that night. He never mentioned it to her. It felt like something private, something sacred. He figured if she wanted people to know she could play, she would tell them herself. But now, standing in this hallway with no pianist and 200 impatient guests waiting, that memory came flooding back. He walked over to Mira slowly, almost hesitantly. "Mira," he said softly, "do you have a moment?" She looked up, surprised. "Of course, Mr. Whitfield. Is everything okay?" He glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that you can say no. There's no pressure. I won't hold it against you either way." Mira frowned, confused. "What is it?" "Mr." Whitfield took a deep breath. "The pianist we hired for tonight didn't show up. He's sick. I've been trying to find a replacement for the past hour. But it's impossible on such short notice." He paused. choosing his next words carefully. I heard you play once, late at night, when you thought no one was around. Mira, you were incredible. I've never heard anything like it. Mira's face went pale. Her heart started pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. It's okay, Mr. Whitfield said gently. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I never told anyone about it. But right now, I'm desperate. If you could just play for 30 minutes, maybe 40, it would save this entire evening. Mira shook her head quickly. Mr. Whitfield, I can't. I haven't performed in years. I'm not that person anymore. I understand, he said. And like I said, you can say no. But I saw you out there tonight. I saw what happened with that guest at the bar. Mira looked away, her jaw tightening. I'm sorry that happened to you, Mr. Whitfield continued. People like that, they don't see us. They think we're just part of the furniture. But I know you're more than that. I've always known it. There was a long silence. Mira stared at the floor, her mind racing. Perform? In front of all those people? In front of Raymond Carter and his laughing friends? The thought made her want to run away and hide. It had been 6 years since she had played for an audience. 6 years since she had walked away from everything she had worked for. She had told herself that chapter of her life was closed, that it was better to move on than to torture herself with memories of what could have been. But was it really closed? Or had she just been hiding? Every night when she sat at that piano in the empty ballroom, she told herself it was just for fun. Just a way to relax. But deep down, she knew the truth. She played because she had to, because the music was still inside her, burning to get out. She thought about her mother. About the years of sacrifice. About all the times she had told herself that her dreams didn't matter. That being practical was more important than being happy. And then she thought about Raymond Carter. The way he had looked at her like she was nothing. The way he had laughed. The way everyone around him had laughed too. Something shifted inside her. Not anger exactly. Something deeper. Something that had been waiting for this moment. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. If I do this, Mira said slowly, I do it my way. I play what I want to play. No requests. No interruptions. Mr. Whitfield's face lit up with relief. Absolutely. Whatever you want. I'll make sure no one bothers you. Mira nodded, her heart still pounding. And I'm not changing my clothes. I go out there. As I am. In my uniform. That's fine. That's completely fine. Mira took a deep breath and looked toward the ballroom doors. She could hear the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, the sound of people waiting to be entertained. For a moment, fear gripped her. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her fingers stumbled? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone? But then another voice spoke up inside her. A stronger voice. The voice of the girl she used to be. You were born for this. You've always been born for this. Mira straightened her shoulders and looked at Mr. Whitfield. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. Mr. Whitfield grabbed her hand and shook it gratefully. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means, but Mira barely heard him. She was already thinking about the piano, about the keys waiting for her touch, about the music that had been locked inside her for so long. Tonight, she would let it out, and nothing would ever be the same again. Mira stood at the entrance of the ballroom, hidden behind a tall marble pillar. From where she stood, she could see everything. The glittering chandeliers, the elegant guests in their fancy clothes, the waiters moving like shadows between tables. And in the corner, sitting under a soft spotlight, the grand piano. Her piano. At least, that's how she had come to think of it over the past 3 years. She had played it so many times in the darkness of empty nights that it felt like an old friend. But tonight, everything was different. Tonight, it wasn't just her and the piano. Tonight, 200 strangers would be watching. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them together, trying to steady her nerves. What am I doing? She thought. This is insane. I should go back there and tell Mr. Whitfield I changed my mind. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew she wouldn't do it. Something inside her had already made the decision. She was going to walk out there. She was going to sit down at that piano, and she was going to play, not for Raymond Carter. Not for any of these wealthy strangers who wouldn't remember her name tomorrow. She was going to play for herself. For the girl she used to be. For the dreams she had buried, but never really let go of. Mr. Whitfield appeared beside her. Are you ready? He asked gently. Mira nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I'll introduce you. Just walk out when you hear your name. He stepped into the ballroom and made his way to a small microphone stand near the piano. The chatter in the room gradually quieted as people noticed him. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Whitfield said, his voice warm and professional. Thank you all for being here tonight. We have a very special treat for you this evening. Please welcome a talented musician who will be performing for us. Please give a warm welcome to Mira Vasquez. There was polite applause, the kind people give when they're not sure what to expect. A few guests looked around curiously, wondering who this performer was. Mira stepped out from behind the pillar. The moment she appeared, the applause faltered. People started whispering. She could see the confusion on their faces. This wasn't a glamorous performer in a flowing gown. This was a woman in a hotel uniform, a staff member, the concierge. Near the bar, Raymond Carter noticed the commotion and turned to look. When he saw Mira walking toward the piano, his eyes went wide. Then his face broke into a grin of disbelief. Oh, this is too good, he said to his friends, not bothering to keep his voice down. The concierge is going to play for us. What's next? The bellboy doing a magic show? His friends laughed. A few other guests nearby heard the comment and smirked. Mira heard it too. Every word. But she didn't stop walking. She kept her eyes fixed on the piano, putting one foot in front of the other. When she reached the bench, she paused for just a moment. She ran her fingers lightly over the polished wood, feeling its familiar smoothness. Then she sat down. The room was still buzzing with whispers. She could feel the doubt in the air. People didn't believe in her. They saw her uniform and made their judgment. To them, she was just the help, someone who had wandered onto the stage by mistake. Mira closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she wasn't in a ballroom anymore. She was back in her childhood home, sitting at the old upright piano her father had bought her when she was 5. She could hear his voice in her memory, gentle and encouraging. Play from your heart, little one. The notes don't matter. What matters is what you feel. She placed her fingers on the keys, and then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor floated into the air, soft at first, delicate, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Within seconds, something changed in the room. The whispers stopped. The smirks faded. Glasses were slowly lowered to tables. Conversations died mid-sentence. People turned toward the piano, one by one, as if pulled by an invisible force. Mira didn't see any of it. Her eyes were still closed. She was somewhere else now, lost in the music that had been her whole world for so many years. Her fingers moved across the keys with a grace and precision that came from decades of practice, from countless hours of repetition, from a love so deep it had become part of her soul. The melody built slowly, like a story being told without words. It spoke of longing, of loss, of dreams that had been shattered and pieced back together again. It was the sound of a heart that had known pain but refused to give up. Mira's fingers danced faster now as the piece grew more intense. The notes cascaded like waterfalls, crashing and flowing, powerful and unstoppable. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying gently as if she and the piano had become one. In the audience, something remarkable was happening. People who had never cried at a concert in their lives felt their eyes growing wet. A woman in a red dress pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. An elderly man who had heard the greatest pianists in the world leaned forward in his chair, his mouth slightly open in amazement. Even the waiters had stopped moving. They stood frozen with their trays, unable to look away, and near the bar, Raymond Carter had gone completely still. The smile had vanished from his face. The whiskey glass hung forgotten in his hand. He stared at Mira as if he was seeing her for the first time. And in a way, he was. This was not the woman he had mocked a few hours ago. This was not some desperate gold digger looking for a rich husband. This was an artist. A master. Someone whose talent was so far beyond anything he could ever achieve that it made him feel small in a way he had never felt before. The music reached its peak, filling every corner of the ballroom with sound and emotion. It was the kind of playing that made you forget where you were. The kind that reached inside your chest and squeezed your heart. The kind that reminded you of every beautiful and painful thing you had ever experienced. And then, slowly, the piece began to wind down. The notes grew softer, gentler, like a storm passing and leaving behind a calm, clear sky. Mira played the final notes with her eyes still closed. Her fingers lingered on the keys for a moment, letting the sound fade into silence. And then, nothing. Complete silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire ballroom was suspended in that moment, still under the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly man in the front. He rose from his chair, his hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Then the woman in the red dress stood up. Then another guest. And another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was thunderous. People were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were looking at each other in disbelief, as if confirming that what they had just heard was real. Mira opened her eyes. For a moment, she seemed confused, like someone waking from a dream. She looked out at the standing ovation, at the faces filled with admiration and awe. And something shifted in her expression. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was something quieter than that. Something like peace. She had done it. After 6 years of silence, she had played again. And she had remembered who she really was. Mira stood slowly and gave a small, humble bow. The applause continued, refusing to die down. Across the room, Raymond Carter still hadn't moved. His face was pale. His hands hung at his sides. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The applause seemed to go on forever. Wave after wave of clapping filled the ballroom as Mira stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite appreciation at best, maybe a few nods and some scattered claps before everyone went back to their champagne and conversations. She had not expected this. People were actually crying. Grown men in expensive suits were wiping their eyes and pretending they had something stuck in them. Women were clutching each other's arms and shaking their heads in disbelief. It was the kind of reaction that performers dream about but rarely experience. When the applause finally began to fade, something else happened. People started moving toward her. Not walking. Almost rushing. Within seconds, Mira found herself surrounded by a crowd of guests, all of them wanting to talk to her. "That was absolutely magnificent," said a tall woman with silver hair and elegant pearl earrings. "I've been attending concerts for 50 years, and I can count on one hand the performances that moved me like that." "Where did you study?" asked a man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "Your technique is extraordinary. How long have you been playing?" another guest wanted to know. "Why aren't you performing professionally?" The questions came from every direction. Mira tried to answer them all, but she was still in a daze. Part of her felt like she was floating outside her own body. Watching this scene happen to someone else, Mr. Whitfield appeared at her side, beaming with pride. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "I told you," he whispered to her. "I told you that you were incredible." Mira managed a small smile. "Thank you for believing in me." Through the crowd, she noticed an older woman making her way toward her. This woman carried herself differently from the others. There was something calm and purposeful about her, the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of being respected. She wore a simple black dress with a single diamond brooch, and her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun. When she reached Mira, the crowd seemed to part for her naturally, as if everyone recognized her importance. "Young lady," the woman said, her voice warm but serious. "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm on the board of directors for the City Philharmonic Orchestra." Mira's heart skipped a beat. She knew that name. Everyone in the classical music world knew that name. Catherine Wells was one of the most influential patrons of the arts in the country. She had launched the careers of dozens of musicians. A single word from her could open doors that most people didn't even know existed. "I've heard a lot of pianists in my life," Catherine continued. "Some technically perfect, some emotionally powerful. Very few who are both." She paused, looking at Mira with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are both." Mira didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Catherine reached into her small handbag and pulled out a business card. "I don't give these out often, but I want you to call me next week. We have a young artist program at the Philharmonic. Scholarships, mentorship, performance opportunities. I think you would be a perfect fit." She pressed the card into Mira's hand. "Don't let fear stop you this time. Whatever happened before, whatever made you walk away from music, it's in the past. The world needs to hear you play." Mira looked down at the card, her vision blurring with tears. She couldn't hold back anymore. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll call," Catherine replied with a small smile. "That's all I ask." As Catherine walked away, Mr. Whitfield squeezed Mira's shoulder. "I always knew you were special," he said quietly. "And for the record, whatever position you want at this hotel, it's yours. Or if you decide to leave and pursue music again, I'll write you the best recommendation letter anyone has ever seen." Mira laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield, for everything." The crowd around her had started to thin as guests returned to their tables, still buzzing about what they had witnessed. But Mira noticed that one person hadn't moved at all. Raymond Carter was still standing near the bar. His friends had drifted away, perhaps sensing that something uncomfortable was about to happen. He stood alone, his glass empty, his face unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at her from across the room. Then, slowly, he began to walk toward her. The guests nearby noticed. A few of them exchanged glances. Word had spread about what he had said earlier, about the cruel joke he had made at her expense. People were watching now, curious to see what would happen. Raymond stopped a few feet away from Mira. Up close, he looked different than he had before. Smaller somehow. The arrogance that had seemed so natural on his face earlier was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For a man who always had something to say, he seemed to be struggling to find the right words. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its usual confidence. "What I said earlier tonight was wrong. It was cruel and ignorant, and completely uncalled for." Mira looked at him steadily, but didn't respond. She wanted to hear what else he had to say. "I judged you based on your job," Raymond continued. "I made assumptions about who you were without knowing anything about you. And I was wrong, completely wrong." He paused, swallowing hard. "You're incredibly talented, more talented than anyone I've ever met. And I'm sorry for the way I treated you." End quote. The room had gone quiet. People were pretending not to listen, but everyone was listening. Mira considered his words carefully. She could see that the apology was genuine. He wasn't just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. He was actually embarrassed, actually ashamed. Part of her wanted to accept his apology gracefully and move on. That would be the polite thing to do, the professional thing, the thing that would make everyone comfortable. But another part of her knew that this moment mattered. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been looked down on because of their job or their clothes or their bank account. "Thank you for the apology," Mira said finally. Her voice was calm and steady. I can see that you mean it, and I appreciate that. Raymond's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he had been bracing for something worse. But Mira wasn't finished. I want you to understand something, though, she continued. I didn't play tonight for your approval. I didn't play to prove anything to you or to anyone else in this room. I played because music is who I am. It's always been who I am, whether I was on a concert stage or working behind a desk. She took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. People like me, we don't need to be saved. We don't need rich men to take pity on us. We're not waiting around hoping someone will notice us. We're building our lives one day at a time, with dignity and hard work. And we deserve respect, not because of what we can do, but because of who we are. Raymond stood frozen, unable to look away. So yes, I accept your apology, Mira said. But I hope you remember this night. I hope you remember that every person you meet has a story you don't know, and maybe next time, you'll think twice before you judge someone by their uniform. She gave him a small nod, then turned and walked away. Behind her, Raymond Carter stood alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by people who had witnessed everything. For the first time in his life, he had no clever comeback, no way to spin the situation in his favor. He could only stand there and face the weight of his own words. Mira walked out of the ballroom with her head held high. She didn't look back. 1 year later, she performed her first solo concert with the City Philharmonic Orchestra. The tickets sold out in 3 hours. Critics called her a revelation. Audiences gave her standing ovations that lasted for minutes. But whenever people asked her about the moment that changed everything, she didn't talk about the concert hall, or the famous orchestra, or the glowing reviews. She talked about a cold December night when she was still wearing a concierge uniform, when a cruel joke pushed her to reclaim something she thought she had lost forever. She talked about the night she stopped hiding and remembered who she really was, and she never forgot it.